Okay, it is May 28th, 2020, and I'm Mike Bridgewater, the Operations Director here at Mount Gilead, and today I get to do the devotion. And today's devotion is going to be about the Sea of Galilee, and I have a couple pictures to talk about here, and I want to point a few things out. So this first picture that I want to show you was taken actually on the Sea of Galilee, and hopefully you can see this. It's kind of hard to see, but there's some birds flying around and some boats, and up here on the hillside, this is a city, and that is the city of Tiberias. And that's the same, that is named after the Tiberius that is mentioned in Luke 3:1, the Tiberius Caesar. He was the emperor back in the Bible days. The Sea of Galilee is the lowest freshwater lake on earth. The River Jordan drops into it from the north, coming down from Mount Hermon. There's some hot springs in it, and then the River Jordan exits on the south side and heads down to the Dead Sea about 80 miles to the south. I mentioned earlier there's these birds in this picture, and if you go on to Google and you do a search on how many birds fly through Israel every year, it's an amazing number. There's hundreds of millions of birds that migrate from Africa up to Asia and Europe that go through Israel, and there's some really fantastic photography of birds that you can see online there in Israel. And when we were there was just birds. You look up in the sky and there's birds somewhere. Another picture that I have here was one that was taken on the kind of the northwest quadrant of the Sea of Galilee, and it's very picturesque. And this barren ridge line over here on the east side is the Golan Heights. You may have heard about. But this picture was taken from one of the areas that they think the Sermon on the Mount was probably delivered at. There's a couple sites there on the northwestern shore that could be the location of the Sermon on the Mount, but they didn't put a plaque down after the Sermon on the Mount and say the Sermon on the Mount was done here. So that's one of the areas. And that's the sermon series that we're in right now that Jeff's preaching on, what the world needs now, and that's kind of where that took place. And interesting, one of the interesting things about the Gospels is a lot of the activity of the Gospels takes place on this little northwestern corner of the Sea of Galilee, which is a interesting place to headquarter your ministry from. So if we go back in the book of Luke, at the first couple chapters, the first 4 chapters of Luke, we learn a few things that Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist, and then for 40 days he endured the temptation in the wilderness, and then he returns back home to Nazareth, where he grew up at, and said he became strong and filled with wisdom and favor, and God was upon him. And early in chapter 14, we learn that he starts his ministry, and it says that there's a good report that went out to all the surrounding country. And right after that, we get into the story about how he's rejected in his hometown of Nazareth. And I'll leave that little bit of the story about the rejection and for you to do some self-study on. But he mentions a story about Elijah, and he mentions another story about Elisha. And the people get very, very angry with him, and they actually try to throw him off a cliff. But I'll leave that to you to go do some study on that later today. So after that, he goes to Capernaum, which is on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee. And it appears from John chapter 2 that he'd been there before. He'd traveled to Capernaum shortly after turning the water into wine in Cana. And for us today, it may seem way out of place to put your ministry headquarters in this little town on the northwest corner of the Sea of Galilee. But back in Bible times, there was a very, very good reason why you would make this your home base, and that reason is access to people. There was a significant trade route. The primary trade route of the Bible times and back in the time of the Egyptians was known as the Way of the Sea. and that highway basically went right along the west and north side of the Sea of Galilee. So, if your mission was to come and seek and save that which was lost, that would be the best location to get the word out. And then we read later in Luke 4:31, after he'd healed this demon-possessed man, and the story wraps up with, and reports about him went out into every place in the surrounding region. So that road, that trade route was being used. It was kind of like their version of the information superhighway, to get information out to people so that he would be known. And we've learned before that Jesus became famous throughout the land. He had huge crowds following. And that's what I want to end on today and consider today on this kind of rainy Thursday morning, is the lengths and depths that God has gone to have a relationship with his people and to be known to his people and to have things that you can tell to people about him and the wondrous things that he's done. And today we don't have to, go walking around and traveling. It's much easier. We're live streaming services for the next 2 Sundays, and you don't have to travel to the next town to share the gospel. You can hit the share button when you're watching the live stream and share the gospel with your friends. It's kind of like if you hit the share button one time, you share the gospel with 10 people that may not have heard it before. So it's much easier for us today to share the gospel, and that's what I'd want to challenge you to do this coming Sunday or today is be like Luke and share the good news of Jesus Christ. So have a great day, and I'll see you sometime in the future.